Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about hire or no firing people or keeping them around. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, when you realize that you haven't hired a technically strong engineer, would you try to get rid of them or would you try to help them get better? Excellent question. That depends on the type of contract that they are hired to fulfill. Like basically, or is this a senior level, mid level? Like what level of developer are we talking about here? How great is the gap? Like how much of process would it require to get this person up to snuff? And what type of person? This is the most important thing, I think. Do I need for this thing that we're doing? It is the most important thing, I would say, and a lot of companies I find have a hard time with this one, and I have so many examples of where you get the wrong individual. You either invest a lot in them and then it doesn't turn you basically they leave or so forth because the person, the hiring manager or whoever's getting the person for a role doesn't understand that you can't just pick someone for certain roles. You have to have someone in many cases who is a good fit for the role that you're looking for, and most managers don't really do that. They just look at, oh, this person has technical skills and they have the years that I require. Done deal, right? It's not that simple. Because not all roles within programming are equal. Some roles require a certain sort of individual, whereas in other roles it's more about just churning out code at the proficient level. So let's walk through it. So the first thing, as I said, is what type of developer am I dealing with? So for example, if I've hired an individual or someone is supposed to be a senior level software developer, and they can't really produce anything in a technical fashion, then it sort of ties in, because these things are sort of intertwined. It's hard to say that, oh, then that means that we're going to get rid of them. It really ties into the other stuff, as I was saying, like what expectations do we have to have on this person and how far are they off. And in many cases, I would say that if you have a weak senior, you're basically just fire them. In many cases, I would say. The reality is that it's very, very rare to see a senior level software developer, depending on the person now, just sort of bridge the fact that they don't really produce all that well. Because usually by the time they become seniors, it's very difficult for to mold them into someone who is better. They're depending on the senior now, they should have already reached that point. This is something that I see quite a lot, frankly, where like you can train certain seniors into certain things. Like you can teach anybody basically how to work in a slightly different way, or you can train most people into how to run an efficient work process or things like that. But if they're struggling with basic concepts, or like they're having troubles, a classic one is, which I have a lot of issues with, is say testing and quality and actually producing reliable software. Uh, this is actually something that is beyond quite a lot of quote unquote, like they call themselves seniors. I don't like that term because they're usually, in my opinion, full of shit. Because to me, seniority is a more it requires you to have already mastered something like this. And when you don't have these sorts of things down, in other words, the project basically just degrades over time because of your incompetence within an area, I argue that you haven't really mastered like what it is to ship this thing. And so when you're dealing with such an individual, it's basically impossible for you to train them into being good at this thing, and in many cases it's easier for you to just let them go, because there are, and that brings us back to what do I need this person to do. Because if, for example, if I'm working on a project where it's a fairly unimportant application, it doesn't have a lot of it doesn't have like a high level of quality requirements and so forth, which I think is absolutely horrible, because if you're good at this stuff, like it's sort of, it should be something everybody does, but the reality is very different. Well, then you can keep this person around, because if they're overall producing well and like they're lacking in some area, you can sort of let the other parts weigh up the fact that they might be weak in technically, because there are not that many requirements on, say, high quality of development and so forth. But in another project it might be the case. So it really comes down to, does this person fit the criteria for this specific role, even though they're technically weak? And in that case you can invest and sort of like just help train them. If it's say if it's a junior profile, then in many cases it's better to just help train them, depending once again on how far is the distance. If you're dealing with a junior who basically can't do anything whatsoever and you need someone who is more autonomous, then again you might have to get rid of them. But on the other hand, if you're dealing with someone who has like the right personality and they seem to have an aptitude and like a willingness to learn and adapt, and you sort of get all the right signals from them, then you should keep them around, because you can train. It's easier to train weak technical skills in a person who is a good fit for the role that you're looking for, than it is to find that person, or if then to find that person with strong technical skills, or to use a person with strong technical skills who lacks the other part. To give you a very concrete example of that, I've worked with quite a lot of software developers who may be pretty good at the software development process, like they can write code and they will pass a code test. But as I said, they might not know the first thing about creating unit tests. So the system is always buggy, it's always problematic, there's always regressions whenever they do anything, even though they're really, quote unquote, really good. In some cases you deal with projects where the software developers have a lot of personal responsibility in the product area, because like you have technical systems and things like that where they really need to know what they're supposed to be building. They don't have a PO or anybody like just tells them so they can just churn out code. As I've used the term before, you have engine type of software developers who just churn out code, right? This is the wrong individual for that sort of system, because basically what's going to happen is that they're just going to start producing shit and it's not going to be the right stuff, and the system is going to degrade and have a lot of unnecessary feature, or have all these or other sorts of issues that come from the fact that they're not product minded or they have no business mindset, and that is a very big problem. That's not something you can train. The reality is usually that you cannot train that into, or rather it's extremely difficult, depending once again on the person. And so to answer your question in a more as a summary, if you're in the situation between technical skills and like keep someone around and train them, or basically let them go, it really comes down to these three main areas. Number one, what are they hired to do? In other words, are they like, is it reasonable to say that they can be taught the thing that you're looking for? Because that ties into the second thing. How much of an investment are you going to have to make here? Is it even feasible to teach them? I mean, teaching someone a new tool or a new stack or a slightly different way of working, that's easy. But teaching them like the fundamentals of how to structure, say, a test and like do that well, or in more extreme cases, basically teach them how to think about other people and product mindedness and things like that. That's a very big investment. So it really comes down to, do you have those sort of resources? And third and lastly, well, basically, is this the right person for this role, all things considered? So what I want you to take away from this is that when you think about hire, fire, or like keeping someone around and teaching them, or basically letting them go, it really comes down to like how these three main circumstances. Do you have the is this a person who you basically can make this sort of investment into? Is it feasible that they will adapt and learn and like these sorts of things? Because the reality is, guys, that some people, as we're talking about engines type of developers, they will never be the sort of person who just thinks a big perspective or things like that. They will never get to that point. So if that's the sort of individual you need, it might be better to let them go. But on the other hand, if the issue is that it's just a question of that they don't really know how to use a specific tool or something like that, and you try and show them and you see progress, and you see that, yeah, this person seems to be able to learn the thing, then that's that's an investment you should make I argue. And the same thing goes for when you have the right type of person. If you have, say, my favorite example is junior level software developers. If I have a junior level software developer who has a really great personality, they're really mindful and communicative, and like they have a overall good fit within the team, and they have the right mindset about how everything should work and so forth and so forth. They're moldable into something very useful, and they have weak technical skills. That is not much of an issue, because I can train them usually to learn the technical stuff, and that's going to take some time, but once I'm done with the technical training, they will be more useful than, say, for example, I had a more technical inclined person but who is the wrong fit for this specific team. So it really comes down to your understanding of what you need and how likely it is to get that person to that to be the individual that you need them to be. Have a great day.